That'd be great. Cheers.
Push it out to everyone then. That is recording.
Cool. All right. Share screen. Sure. Share. All right. Yeah, hopefully you can see that. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of what we've been doing internally for kind of automating some of our sort of GUI testing. So yeah, just those of you that don't know me, yeah, LabVIEW champion, etc. Been using LabVIEW for 12-ish years. September 2019, I joined Agilent Technologies, which is formerly Cobalt. They make instruments for like Raman spectroscopy, but they're LabVIEW powered. So our instruments run LabVIEW to do their thing. And yeah, as of sort of the beginning of this year, we kind of started sort of working towards the center of excellence. And so obviously part of that is looking at how we do testing, looking at how we do that kind of stuff, and yeah, trying to improve things and move along. So yeah, there's quite a few of sort of our team here today, including some of our testers who kind of wanted to see what I was going to present. So yeah, hello everyone. Yeah, formerly, I used to run Media Mongrels, which was kind of like my my sort of NI alliance partner company, sort of doing contracting and community stuff like Democracy Bot and the WebSockets library. Again, as with Steve, kind of caveat this that I'm really just kind of standing on the shoulders of giants here. None of this is particularly, I can't take much of the credit for this. It's been the result of the sort of the team working on this. So yeah, credit to them for for their contributions to this. I'm just kind of yeah, the mouthpiece for it rather than anything else. Software testing. So I'm not going to go into this into much detail, but we do sort of started or increasing our level of sort of unit testing. So using the JKI VI tester, which is something that James got me into, and yeah, we've been doing a lot more of that. Yeah, recently. Obviously, unit testing is is okay for testing units and specific pieces of code, but it isn't so good when you're trying to test like a combination of things, or kind of testing user interfaces, or how the user interacts with your application. If it's got a front end, it's quite difficult to, or almost impossible to sort of unit test that. We're actually quite lucky as a team. We actually have a dedicated software quality team. So we, I think this is quite rare in the LabVIEW community, like unless you are doing, sort of software that you give to, customers, or like rather than doing sort of I guess sort of systems integration, if you're writing software to go on hundreds of instruments or whatever, I think it's something that not a lot of sort of LabVIEW teams have a dedicated test team. So we have a few manual testers, and we also have some sort of automation test engineers as well. Now, obviously, manual testing is good. You can catch a lot of things, as well as things that you kind of you didn't really know about, but it's very slow and labor intensive to run through hundreds of test cases, and that kind of means that you're limited to doing a lot of that manual testing sort of at certain points in the project rather than sort of continuously. So you can't really run the full set of tests for every build. And then we have been doing some automated testing. So we had some projects that were using things like AutoIt, which is kind of like a desktop automation tool, and that's kind of like allows you to write a script to click buttons and type in stuff on the keyboard. Which worked, but we found that the tests weren't particularly robust and didn't really fit in with sort of writing lots of tests. We kind of had to do a lot of stuff in those tests manually, and so we kind of started to think of can we do this better, and how do other industries kind of do this kind of testing. So we kind of did a bit of research and found a tool called Test Complete, and so this is a sort of an automated sort of GUI testing suite for testing desktop applications, web applications, like even like things like Android apps, and it can do things like running your tests on 5 different browsers and that kind of thing. So yeah, a really powerful sort of test automation tool. So I'll show you a quick example, which is if I open recent. So this is just one of the kind of the built-in examples. And if I open up, there's a bit like Test Stand. It has like a sort of a, if you've used Test Stand, it's a very familiar interface where you can sort of drag and drop steps into it. Or it's also got sort of a macro recording feature. So you can kind of click record, you can do the steps that you want the test to do, and then you can, it'll convert that into, into the sort of the thing that you see here. But if I run this test, this is testing basically like a simple sort of C# application. So you'll see that my screen's going to go nuts in a minute because yeah, it's going to load up something completely random. Okay, yeah, there we go. So this is opening up like the program, and you can see it's basically like automating it, as a user might. And we can see that when we get to the end, that test has passed, and you can kind of see all of the individual steps, and you get a bunch of cool stuff like it automatically takes screenshots of each step that it runs, so that you can if your test fails or you're trying to sort of debug and find issues with your test, then you can kind of go back and see, well, was it actually on the page or the screen that I thought it was when it tried to type in the text, and that kind of stuff. So you get all this kind of logging and reporting built in. So yeah, that's a very, very quick demo of what Test Complete works. And then this is kind of like you've got the sort of the Test Stand-esque sort of step builder or script builder, but you can also write your tests as scripts. So and it supports a bunch of different scripting languages. So I think this is JavaScript. We've kind of settled on Python sort of internally in our team, but yeah, you can also use things like VB script and all that kind of stuff. It provides a bunch of sort of libraries, and then you can write your script to run your tests. So this is just an example of a JavaScript version of a test. Okay, so yeah, suite for testing desktop, web, mobile applications. You can create and build your tests. So yeah, either by recording, so like doing a sort of an Excel macro. The recording isn't perfect, so generally, like if you were recording an Excel macro, it kind of adds in some extra steps, and you might want to kind of tweak what your test does if you're using the recording feature. But it does give you an idea of like how to do various things, and how yeah, it's quite a good sort of starting point of how can I kind of interact with my application from Test Complete. Yeah, you can write keyword tests, which is kind of a bit like Test Stand. You can write script tests. So yeah, Python, JavaScript. And this is kind of where, we kind of had some scripts that could automate sort of interacting with our application and kind of doing some pass-fail tests. But obviously, we have a Jenkins server that runs all of our builds automatically, runs our unit tests automatically, and kind of that side of things wasn't really very integrated with how we're trying to sort of move ahead in future. So it has built-in Jenkins integration. So you've got Test Complete, which is kind of like the IDE, and then you've got Test Execute, which is kind of like the script runtime engine. So it can basically take your scripts, it can run them on a build server, and then there's also like a Jenkins plugin for it as well, so it'll kind of automatically publish the results sort of into your Jenkins job. We've also set up Jira integration. So there's kind of like an example at the bottom right, which is when we run our automated tests, it'll automatically post that into Jira so that we can see that, yeah, we've got the evidence that the tests were run, and we can see, if they've passed or failed, from Jira and, from the Jenkins server as well. Supports a bunch of sort of test reporting formats. So, JUnit is kind of like one of the common ones that, we use with like Jenkins. It is a paid tool, and some of the bits I'm going to show you are kind of extras, but I do think like if you were to try and automate, or if you were to try and do this yourself just with Python, or with something like AutoIt or Securely, these sort of like desktop automation tools, you wouldn't get a lot of this kind of stuff built in. So yeah, you do have to pay for it. I don't think it's particularly cheap, but I think you get a hell of a lot kind of out of the box with it. And if you're doing if you want to do this kind of testing, yeah, it's kind of a sort of an industry standard tool for that. Okay, so what about using it with LabVIEW? Yeah, wouldn't that be nice? And also good luck with that. Unfortunately, yeah, there's LabVIEW is quite the special beast when it comes to desktop applications and doesn't really conform to other desktop software, protocols and techniques. And so, yeah, kind of it can be done. And I'm going to show you kind of some ways to do it. But a lot of the sort of the things that you can do with like a .NET application or like a WinForms application, you can't really do with LabVIEW because LabVIEW is a special beast. So yeah, basically the kind of thing that kind of stops this from working for us is kind of LabVIEW uses its own kind of GUI rendering system. So if you're doing like a .NET application and you're using kind of WinForms, so dropping the controls onto the a WinForms panel, you can basically test complete kind of allows you to delve into all of those properties and see, rather than kind of doing like a screen capture, you can just pick out what the value of a text box is. You can just kind of select a text box by name, and you can get the sort of all of the properties about it. So for example, going into my test complete, the sort of the sample project here, you can see my main form, my WinForms object, my orders view, and then I can click an item based on its kind of name. And so all of this kind of nice stuff that test complete does, we're kind of have our hands tied behind our backs a little bit doing that from LabVIEW. So yeah, if you're trying to, in fact, if I show you the, you've got this object browser. So this kind of shows you a list of all of your, there we go. So this shows you like a list of all of your sort of Windows applications. You can then kind of click on one and you can see the windows that are in it, and you can kind of see all of the properties that are available for you to look at and check. So yeah, pretty much with LabVIEW applications, all you can really see on there is like the main window or sort of like any sort of dialog VIs, but you can't really get anything about what's kind of in them or what's on them through this sort of object browser. So it does make things harder, but not impossible. So one of the add-ons that you can get for Test Complete is called the Intelligent Quality add-on. And this basically gives you OCR and image matching capabilities. So for example, you can point it at a region of the screen and it can pick out text from that, or you can match against, if you if you can kind of take a screenshot of a pressed button or a disabled button, and you can then compare what's on screen to to that. So I'll kind of show some examples as I kind of get a little bit further on about how this how that works. Obviously, with it being a sort of with it being sort of like Python and the scripting capabilities, you can interact with it through ActiveX, but I think the VI server ActiveX interface is pretty limited. Like I think you can just about get the values of controls, but it's I think unless we've kind of missed something, but it tended yeah, it seemed to be quite difficult to kind of get the information that we wanted out of it. So we kind of came up with this sort of VI server test interface. So this was kind of adding a VI onto our block diagram that can kind of get us that information that we want out of our application, and then kind of send that back to Test Complete. So this is kind of what it looks like. I mean, so a little bit of a warning. This is kind of a proprietary interface. I don't think I'll be able to kind of publish this to the community. But there isn't really anything too special about what it's doing. Basically what we do is we drop an instance of our sort of test interface on our block diagram, and that kind of sits there and listens for an incoming TCP connection from Test Complete, and then basically and then you kind of customize that and the protocol for that to give you a list of the VIs that are in your application, and then when you've got that list of VIs, you can then basically, for a particular VI, get a list of all the controls, and then if you point it at a VI and a control name, it'll basically send you a a JSON packet that has sort of the properties and information that you want. So things like well, whatever you want, basically. So we have things like the label, caption, the value, depending on the control type, we do things like returning, the list items for a list box, all that kind of stuff. And so that really kind of, we can't use the test complete sort of property browser, but this kind of gives us our own way of sort of accessing, the information that we want, when we want it from the application. So yeah, and it's just a simple sort of JSON over TCP/IP based protocol, and then obviously we just use the Python socket library to to interact with it. So yeah, just a sort of a sneak peek inside that we get a find the control based on its name, or sorry, open a reference to the VI, get a try and find the control reference, and then if we found it, we can then basically flatten the sort of the information that we want about that control to JSON, and then send it back to test complete. So I'll show you a quick demo of that now. So if I open up my application, builds. So what I've actually done is, for the example of this, is I've taken the built-in LabVIEW finite measurement application example. So this is just one of the NI sample projects. So I just thought that would be a good sort of a good sort of simple application to kind of show you how this works. So if I open up my application, nothing particularly special about it. You can acquire data and all that kind of stuff. And then if I go back to and then what one of our team has done is kind of provide this sort of developer interface is our kind of version of the test complete sort of property browser. So like our testers, they're not LabVIEW programmers. They won't be able to kind of open up LabVIEW and find out what the VI names are or what the control names are. So to kind of give them a fighting chance of finding the right thing, we've basically got this kind of this tool that they can use that kind of connects on that test interface and allows them to kind of browse for the information that they want. So for example, if I type in main to filter the list, and then this gives us a list of all of our controls that are on that front panel. You can see when I click on them that you can see the sort of the information about them coming up here. So if I acquire some data and then reload that, I've now got all of the the graph data available to me, and I can then kind of process that on the test complete side. And you can kind of see here the JSON that I'm sort of sending and receiving. So again, if we kind of implement a sort of extra custom functionality in there, then we can kind of extend that test interface and add additional sort of commands to it for sort of to handle sort of specific cases that the default doesn't handle. Okay, so that's that. I'm going to introduce something called Gherkin and sort of behavior-driven development. So this is something I didn't really know much about a few weeks ago, but we had some talks with some sort of web developers and how how they kind of do some testing. And so I just kind of wanted to introduce this idea of sort of behavior-driven development. So obviously, what you could do is you could kind of treat your tests as a sort of sequential list of actions with some sort of pass-fail checkpoints along the way of once you've acquired some data, does it look like this and that kind of thing. But what that means is you end up writing quite a long script, and it can be quite difficult to follow that. It's kind of if you were kind of reviewing these tests, you'd need to kind of know how the scripting worked and that kind of thing to be able to kind of understand what it's doing. And also, your comparison data and that kind of thing might be kind of combined in the combined in there as well. So yeah, kind of the main thing is, if you write it as a sort of a long sequential script, it can be quite difficult then for sort of non-technical people, the sort of the business side of things, or some of the sort of testing and quality side, to be able to kind of follow that. So the idea of behavior-driven development, so kind of similar to sort of test-driven development, where you kind of you write a unit test and then kind of write the code until it passes. Behavior-driven development is kind of like you write your sort of your behaviors and your scenarios up front, and then you kind of write the code and write the test to make those behaviors pass. And the way that you do that is by kind of writing a very sort of simple human language based test scenarios. So kind of as a collaborative team of developers, your sort of marketing people, your test and quality people, you kind of come together and you write all your scenarios in a sort of a human readable way, and that kind of then forms the basis of all of your kind of test cases. I know that James kind of talked about this, and it's part of his like VITAC thing of the sort of given, when, then structure of writing tests, and this sort of behavior-driven development kind of follows that very closely. So Gherkin, behavior-driven development is kind of like the test methodology, and then Gherkin is kind of like the sort of the simple human readable language that you use to write your tests. So up in the sort of the top side here, this is a Gherkin feature file. So this kind of describes your feature that you're going to test, and then you kind of write a bunch of scenarios of, when I visit this web page, or given I'm on this web page, when I enter my username and password, then I see the the I'm logged in message. And then what you can do within Test Complete and in other kind of sort of BDD tools is you can kind of convert that script automatically into sort of functions for your tests. So that kind of just gives you this kind of the structure for your tests, and you can kind of fill in the blanks for the sort of the individual parts of your tests, and kind of gives you the ability of reusing things between different tests as well. So yeah, a demo to kind of bring it all together then. So if I go back to Test Complete and I go back to here, open recent. So I've written kind of 3 scenarios for my little, close that down, for my little test application. So if I open this up, it builds finite measurement main. So the first thing I want to do is test the analyze function. So background is kind of like your sort of common setup, I guess. So for each of my scenarios, I want to make sure that the app is running and I've cleared any existing data, so that I know that I'm not reusing old data. And then I kind of write my scenario. So my scenario outline is that I want to check the analysis mean calculation. And then this kind of then goes into the human readable part. So when I load the test data file, TDMS file, and I click the analyze button, then the mean value should be mean. So, and then basically you can then define your test data sort of in this sort of tabular format. So you can go through, I can basically add as many different sort of values or as many different TDMS files that I want to check, and check their value, without having to touch the, without having to touch any of the, the sort of scripts behind it. And so it kind of automatically loops through each of these examples to run through. So I've also got one for testing my GUI, and so that's basically testing that after I've acquired some data, these buttons are enabled, and that when I clear the data, they're all disabled. So here again, as a user, I want to clear an understandable user interface, and this kind of terminology is kind of like the sort of agile user stories. So yeah, the kind of the as a user kind of defining things sort of in that way. So yeah, a couple of different scenarios there of clearing and acquiring some data, and then basically checking each of these buttons that it's enabled and disabled. And finally, I've got an import and export one. So this is testing importing data from a TDMS file, exporting data to a TDMS file, and also one of the options on here, once you've got some data, is to copy the graph, and that'll copy it to the clipboard. So again, so these are the kind of the test cases that I've come up with. And so after I've kind of written these files, I can then click on generate step definitions, and that'll basically create me automatically. I don't know why it's up here. Yeah, that'll kind of create these kind of function definitions that I can then populate with my tests. So I've got a few sort of common things that I've kind of used across those tests. So there's kind of like a Python library that kind of has that in. But you can see, given the app is running, so this is, here I'm kind of launching the app if it's not already running. Given I've cleared any existing data, then clear the data. So all this is doing is kind of clicking the clear button. When I load the test data file argument, so this is kind of, basically reading in the parameters from my, feature file. When I click the analyze button, so here you can see an example of the sort of the OCR. So this is looking on the main LabVIEW window for some text that says analyze, and then basically clicking in the middle of that. So, it's literally looking at this panel, and it's trying to find this text, and then it'll click, the center of where it finds that. And then the mean value should be, argument. So again, that's taking, the mean values that come here. And again, so I'm basically, after you click on analyze, you get a little window pop up. And again, I'm using the OCR to basically pick out this, this numeric value that comes back here. So you can see here, I'm checking the text, that it's basically matches mean, colon, space, and then my, the text value that I kind of expect to get for that data set, and then kind of finally clicking on the OK button. So that's kind of like, then like an example of a, of sort of the implementation. And again, test complete kind of gives you some nice things. So like, when I come to writing, it'll create sort of an empty file with sort of, it'll just kind of throw errors for each sort of unimplemented function. But what you can do is you can right click on that function, you can do record this routine, and then that'll start the macro recording to allow me to, kind of do what I need that step to do, and then it'll kind of convert that automatically into the script for us. So so that's really like powerful. If you can just kind of, right click, script, it brings up a little recording thing. I click on analyze, and that'll kind of then get populated into my function. Okay. So same again for the these other ones. So kind of doing some things of entering sort of file paths to save files to, checking for checking that the clipboard contains a picture. I'm basically test complete has got functions in there for reading up an image from the clipboard, so I can basically just check that there is an image in the clipboard after this runs. Okay. So and I can basically, once I've kind of implemented my script, I can then run, I can either run just a single scenario, I can run all scenarios, or if I go up to my execution plan, I've got all my tests, and I can then run, and this will now run through each of my feature files. So you can see basically it happens quite quickly, but you can see it's kind of clicking on the buttons, loading files, through the user interface, checking that the right value comes on, and it'll just keep through. I think the whole process takes about a minute. So we're testing quite a lot of the sort of the functionality of this, quite quickly. You could easily run this on a sort of automated build server and kind of get those results for each build quite easily. and we can see that that's run through, and you can see you basically get the the list of all of the tests, whether they've passed and failed. You can dive into kind of each one, and you can see the log of what happened during that test. And if you come back up to here, you can you can export or export it to a JUnit file. Oh yeah, so if I go to summary, yeah, here you get the the list of all of your tests, whether they passed, failed, how long they took. You can export the summary as a JUnit, and you can also then set up things like to kind of automatically post this information to Jenkins or Jira. If you run through test execute, like sort of the CI version, then you get all that through there. Okay, so yeah, that's kind of that that kind of demo of kind of how all that works. So like I've been kind of I kind of was involved in the sort of the initial trials of using Test Complete sort of inside the company. I'm not a Python expert by any stretch of the imagination, and I wouldn't say that I'm a Test Complete expert either. Like the guys on the team that do this have I think more knowledge than I do of how to use it now. But I I think to write all of those tests with some having some difficulties with Python and that kind of stuff, took me about 6 hours to to do all of this and figure this out. And with a probably if you knew what you were doing, it would probably be a half of that time or a third of that time. It was just because I was kind of learning as I was going, and sort of ran into a few sort of Python issues that just because of lack of familiarity with it. Okay, so yeah, that kind of brings me to the end of the sort of the demos and stuff. So sort of in summary, Test Complete is a sort of industry standard tool for GUI and automated testing. The test step recording is nice, but it'll get you sort of 80% of the way, and you might need to kind of tweak those recordings to get you the rest of the way. And obviously, if you're kind of using the LabVIEW test interface, you'll kind of need to write the script to request the data for that and that kind of thing. It'd be nice if LabVIEW would behave like a normal desktop application, and that you could actually get access to all of the sort of the VI server properties kind of natively from Test Complete. That would be really nice, because you wouldn't have to kind of faff around and kind of put this VI server sort of test interface into your code. The OCR toolkit and add-on generally works quite well, but we have had some issues with, sometimes it's a bit intermittent, that sometimes it won't pick up something that it should, or some won't quite necessarily, like, it's not 100% repeatable, is kind of what we found. But yeah, using something like a little sort of TCP listener in your application, perhaps with a conditional disable, kind of then gives you that power of being able to sort of read and write all of the various bits and pieces that you need. And then if you're kind of looking at how to kind of structure your tests, then there's this sort of Gherkin feature files and the behavior-driven development gives you nice sort of human readable test cases and scripts that anyone can kind of read and understand, and can add new test cases to without kind of having to understand about how the Python side of things work. Okay, that was all I had. So if there's any questions or anything, then fire away and I'll do my best to answer them.
Awesome. And seeing if I can get everyone up on screen again. Well, I can definitely kick you off with one. Did you look at anything already in the community for LabVIEW that might provide some of the functionality you've put into your own server? Sorry, that sounds like a mean question. What I mean is, I've just this niggling feeling in the back of my head. I've seen something before, and I just wondered if there was something you found it wasn't suitable for some reason, or you just cracked on with what you needed.
We just kind of cracked on with what we needed. So I wasn't aware of anything when we kind of started on this. So and it wasn't like I think Ollie, who wrote the test interface, is here, but like it wasn't it wasn't a huge amount of effort to do that. It's some quite basic VI server stuff that pulls out the bits that we're interested in, and flattening them to we're using James Powell's JSON toolkit, which makes doing building up the protocol and the information nice and easy. But yeah, we weren't I wasn't aware of anything that kind of allows you to kind of expose all of the the VI server stuff. But yeah.
Cool. Any other questions?
I've got a quick one, Sam. How long did it take the team to put together the LabVIEW sort of specialist tools for that?
Ollie? Well, I don't know if he's there. Oh,
He's on mute.
I am here. I am here. It took a couple of weeks. I think it took a couple of weeks to do. I think that's fair to say.
So is that effectively a couple of man weeks or a couple of team weeks?
A couple of man weeks. It was, to begin with, I think it was pretty much just me working on it on my own, and then Sam came on the end as well to help out. So yeah, a couple of weeks.
Okay.
Yeah. So that gives you that was kind of the sort of the VI server test interface that we could drop in, and that's kind of got like it's got a class input, so we can kind of override some of the functionality for sort of project specific stuff. Obviously, like the sort of the basic one kind of gives you every VI, and so it can be quite difficult to filter down what are the VIs I'm actually interested in, or which are the ones that are actually sort of GUI VIs. So we kind of extended it for certain projects to be able to kind of get tell me what is the VI that's currently on screen, so that we can then use that in kind of later steps. And also like the sort of the developer interface, so that LabVIEW application that kind of gives the testers the ability to kind of explore it, and also the sort of a Python library that then kind of implements kind of wraps up the sort of the low level socket functionality into a a Python module class that you can use to connect, disconnect, and get the information that you need.
And what sort of how long do you think it's going to take to get that return on that investment of time?
Good question. I think it's going to be very quick, but because we're only just kind of starting, I don't think we've seen it yet. Just because we've I think for one of our projects we've maybe got sort of like 13 or so automated test cases, but that covers, I think those, to run those tests manually takes hours and hours. So automating the tests definitely does give you a quick return on investment. But I don't know that we've quite reached it yet. Like, I think it's kind of one of those things that kind of you have to do quite a bit of upfront investment for, but then it kind of just over time just kind of keeps paying back. Like every time you do a new release of the software, you can rerun your automated tests, or every time you do a build you can rerun your automated tests. And so it's not just about time saved, but also about being able to run regression tests on every new release to make sure that we haven't inadvertently removed a menu item, or we haven't inadvertently just deleted a control that needs to be there for one of the test cases and things. So yeah, haven't really run the numbers on return on investment, but yeah, I think it's definitely going to pay for itself. And now we've got this test interface, we're starting to roll that out into sort of multiple projects, and so yeah, without much modification and that kind of thing, and sort of standardizing on building up that sort of knowledge with the testers as well of how that test interface works and what they can do with it and that kind of thing.
Yeah, it sort of echoes your last slide of automate everything, which I think we'd all agree on.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this whole concept of it aids compliance and just prevents the just the recording errors that testers make as well, which is a common problem. You have problems with, just gets rid of that layer of human error.
Yep. Yeah, so we're just kind of we're obviously still quite early on this journey, and so we don't run our tests on every build yet. That's something that we've got someone kind of looking at the moment, is being able to run these tests on every sort of development build, just to spot regression issues and that kind of thing. And yeah, there's definitely a lot more that we can sort of automate and that kind of stuff now that we've kind of got this, we've got the tool and we've kind of got the framework, we know kind of what we're doing. But yeah, we can really sort of crack on and automate a lot more. And we've got some sort of upcoming web-based projects as well internally. So again, this tool, not just desktop applications, but also being able to test web applications means that we can we can use that.
Yeah, very interesting.
Do you, in terms of working on it as a team, is it something where every developer and every tester needs a copy of Test Complete to work with it, or how do you? Sorry, I'm just looking at pricing. I mean, that's what I'm thinking. And I'm thinking around.
So we just have. So I mean, basically, like our two automation engineers, they have got like licenses for Test Complete. The developers don't have licenses, so I'm borrowing a license, like for the purposes of the demo. We've got like a license server with a couple of licenses on, and obviously Agilent being a global company, like actually one of our sites in Australia also uses Test Complete for testing like C# applications. So we sometimes borrow, like, we kind of pool the licenses, when we need to. But like, the developers don't really need like, a license for it. We kind of just, I think, you need a license for Test Complete, and I think the Test Execute license is separate. A bit like some of the LabVIEW toolkits, they have a runtime license cost.
So that's per build server.
Yeah, or I think as long as, like, if you set up an internal license server, like it's a pool. So as long as you're not trying to run two at the same time, you can you can have multiple VMs, but only one can have the license at a time. So it kind of
Okay.
But yeah,
Cool.
like so generally it's if we do see a test failure, then those tests in future we'll be able to see that in Jenkins, like after the build happens. We'll also get the reports in Jira of when tests failed. So we'll kind of know, and then also generally that we're all kind of based at the same. Obviously not at the moment, but generally we're all kind of based in the same office. So they'll come and tell us, oh, this test is failing, and try and figure out if it's sometimes the test versus sometimes the LabVIEW application. So
and as long as, I guess, you got that basic description plus a screenshot of it, you don't need to. It'll be quick enough as a developer to fire up the software and see the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you get all the screenshots and things, so there's none of that. Well, it works on my machine. Like you've got the or the the classic thing of I can't reproduce this, and or give me all the give me the screenshots. What happened? But you can actually you get all the screenshots kind of built into the tool. So yeah, it's quite useful for that.
Yeah, that's really cool because, like I say, I've been playing with using Python for system testing a little bit, to the advantage that I am the developer and the tester. So that's what I was kind of intrigued when you started this and talking about Test Complete. I think, okay, well, what does that give me over just some Python scripts? But that's it. I mean, as soon as you showed that, it's like, oh, that's really cool. It's so helpful to actually see what's going on.
So Sam, is the test methodology now effectively changing the way that the systems are coded? Is it driving behaviors in that at the development end?
We're quite lucky that we work very closely with our test team. So, and because we're kind of we're sort of following Scrum and the sort of the agile and following agile, the testers and the sort of the are very closely embedded with our team, and certainly, like, I think I don't know that we're quite over that tipping point yet, but it's certainly like, moving in that direction where, we're kind of starting to like write our code more in a way that, makes it easier to unit test, and we're, and that kind of stuff. And yeah, there's probably, I think for the automated tests, perhaps not so much. Maybe it kind of drives the requirements and the user stories a bit more. Because that's kind of, it's the user stories that kind of define the behavior that you're then testing, and we're just kind of the intermediary that makes it happen, I guess. Yeah.
I think it might have driven the best practices a little bit in terms of we've had issues with like control names and stuff not being easy to identify for the automated testers. So I think it has had a little bit of an impact on it, maybe not a huge one though.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like certainly, I can think of a couple of projects where, we obviously now, typically we kind of, add most of our sort of control names and that kind of stuff are all hidden. But now that we kind of, the testers need to know what they are, it kind of, now it starts to pay off that we should make sure that they have sensible names so that, they have a chance of, finding the right things when they're, writing their tests. So yeah, I think that does, it does make a difference.
Yeah, thanks. Very interesting.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. That certainly helped me think through a few things.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's like, there are other tools. So like Selenium is one of like the massive like web-based testing tools and that kind of stuff. But I think like when we kind of were looking around, like, Test Complete, is, it's like sort of multifaceted in that you can do like, app testing, you can do web testing, you can do desktop testing. And so, yeah, there's kind of, a lot of these sort of, things that you read are generally for things like Selenium, which is only kind of web-based testing. And, that's not really, we're kind of doing some of that in future, but yeah, at the moment it's, kind of, making sure we can sort of test our LabVIEW applications.
Yeah, that's the only one I've really tried to use before on a web project. My conclusion in the end with this stuff was actually I need to do more stuff as model view controller with a protocol to the view that I can bypass. I've had one project that already had quite a good TCP interface, and that's been very easy to add tests in Python to talk to it. But even then, that the examples you had with the UI, things being disabled and stuff like that, would be lovely to test. I don't think I'll be jumping in anytime soon, but I'm going to be keeping a very good close eye on it.
Yeah, I suppose that's one of the things about the like changing the developer behavior. So one of the things that this has highlighted, like typically all of our stuff is designed to run on an instrument with hardware. And so one of the things that this has kind of shown us is that, the importance of simulation and, so using hardware abstraction layers. We've been doing a lot of work in that kind of area over the last, few years of, being able to, fully simulate our applications so that we can run them, on a server and, do all this kind of testing. And, the more rich your simulation is, then the more that you can test, so, being able to, yeah, and that's one of the things that we're kind of is sort of where we can kind of improve. And there'll be a lot more to come with that later on, that when we can kind of have applications and we can kind of feed in the data as you would get from the system, we can then also start to check some of the analysis routines and that kind of stuff, and making sure that things display properly on graphs and all that kind of stuff. So we're making some good progress in that kind of area at the moment. And that's one of the things that definitely has changed our behavior of, we must make sure that, everything has kind of a simulation layer built into it, because that opens up, this testing.
That's really interesting. Yeah. So at the minute, it's just, what's the phrase? It's just like a stub. It'll just return a single piece of dummy data or something like that. But you're thinking in the future, again, for the same thing, you could then say, actually, in your case, pretend there's this material in front of the spectrometer and run through the process.
So then kind of to fully kind of complete the circle, like test complete tells the software what data it's going to read next. And you can then check back and check that, what you saw on screen was the result of that analysis on that piece of data. And that's where, you get and being able to run that through lots of different test sets and that kind of thing, you can be pretty confident that things are behaving as they should.
Cool. Excellent. Well, I think if that is all the questions, I shall stop the recording.